June 2017. Surveillance cameras caught the chilling moment inmate Greg Ranki slipped his handcuffs, pulled a blade, and unleashed a brutal attack, all while guards stood by. In this shocking case, it seemed everyone forgot one thing. In prison, the cameras never stop watching. Here are 20 times inmates forgot there were cameras in prison. June 15, 2018, the town of Clovis, New Mexico woke up to alarming news. 3 inmates escaped from Curry County Detention Center. The fugitives, Aaron Clark, Victor Apodaca, and Ricky Senna, had slipped out during their recreation time. Jail cameras caught them walking calmly down a hallway. One pulled out a set of keys, unlocked a secure door, and moments later they were outside, dressed in white and casually strolling as if they were taking a morning walk. These escapees weren't just petty criminals, they were dangerous. Clark was charged with child abuse and identity theft, Apodaca with drug trafficking and firearms violations, and Senna with aggravated battery. And the thing is, their escape wasn't just luck. Serena Dotson, the guard at the control desk, was the key to their freedom. Surveillance footage showed her fidgeting nervously as she opened the doors. She even gave a false head count to cover her tracks, but she missed one glaring detail. The cameras were watching. Dotson was arrested the next morning in Lubbock, Texas, but the fugitives remained at large. For 5 days, their whereabouts were a mystery, until a tip led authorities to an apartment just miles from the jail. Tense confrontation followed, with shots fired after one of the men allegedly pointed a gun at officers. In the end, the men surrendered without injury, but now without adding a fresh escape charge to their rap sheet, extending their already long sentences with an average of 16 years. Dotson didn't get off easy either. She received a 9-year prison sentence. Judge Matthew Chandler described her actions as the result of weeks of planning, not a spur-of-the-moment decision. And well, the story's a clear reminder that no matter how clever a plan might seem, in prison, cameras are always watching. June 2022, the Hamilton County Justice Center found itself at the center of not one, but 2 bold escape attempts that left everyone wondering how such a secure facility could have so many cracks in its system. It started with 2 inmates, Melissa Cordell and George Bridewell, who turned ordinary booking processes into opportunities of freedom. First up was Cordell. On June 8th, while being booked and left unattended, she noticed a half door left unlocked. Security footage caught her slipping through it, making her way into the property area and hiding behind a pole. From there, she takes off her inmate uniform and blends in with a group of released inmates. Cordell then casually walks out of jail like it was nothing. Authorities would catch her the next day, but her escape pointed to some serious gaps in oversight. Then came Bridewell on June 20th. While waiting for arraignment in a holding tank, he saw his opportunity when a deputy called names from a release list. Despite being told not to return to his cell, he joined the group of inmates being processed for release and walked right out. It didn't take long for authorities to recapture him as well, but the ease of his escape raised more questions. Following the escapes, Hamilton County Sheriff Charmaine McGuffey admitted the jail's high volume of inmates and that constant movement created vulnerabilities. Plans to install new cameras, plexiglass, and updated procedures were set in motion. They didn't come soon enough to prevent the next incident. January 26, 2023, Tyrone Edwards, a kitchen worker on trash duty, saw his chance when a dock door was left open. Surveillance cameras capture him running out of the facility at 6 a.m. He made it about 20 minutes away before being apprehended around 9 a.m. Now, county jail has tightened its procedures to prevent future escapes, but if anyone manages to pull it off again, you can bet their master plan will still get caught on camera. March 26, 2018. In a blink and you'll miss it moment, Michael Maldonado slipped under a closing garage door at the Porter County Jail in Indiana, barefoot and handcuffed. It was a bold, almost cinematic escape, caught entirely on security footage. The video shows Maldonado making his dash just as the automatic garage door began to lower, timing his move perfectly. Moments later, officers and a police dog were in pursuit, but Maldonado had already made it out of sight. Police suspect his escape plan didn't stop there. A nearby car dealership reported a stolen Ford Focus less than an hour after he fled. Investigators believed Maldonado used the car to put distance between himself and the jail before ditching it later. later, the search for him spanned the next day, ending in Burns Harbor, about 20 miles from the jail. Maldonado was found in a wooded area near U.S. Route 20 after he fled on foot from a traffic stop. Authorities wasted no time in rearresting him and transporting him back to Porter County Jail. Maldonado's escape may have been a poetic moment of freedom under that garage door, but it didn't take long for reality and law enforcement to catch up. February 4th, 2019. What started as a bold escape attempt turned into this unforgettable crash landing. Blaze Ayers, an inmate at Jackson County Jail in Indiana, tried to pull off a getaway that may have worked, if not for gravity. It began when officers were escorting Ayers back to his holding cell from the outdoor recreation area. Seizing his chance, he bolted into a nearby medical room and locked the door behind him. For a moment, it seemed like he may have had a plan. By the time the deputies entered through the adjacent room, Ayers had crawled into the ceiling, trying to find his way to freedom. But unfortunately for him, jail ceilings aren't built for escape artists. As officers demanded he come down, Ayers kept crawling, ignoring their warnings. His escape quickly turned chaotic as he damaged the ceiling panels with every move. Eventually, the structure gave way, sending him crashing into the booking area below. Tangled in wires, surrounded by 4 officers, Ayers had nowhere left to run. But even then, he still didn't give up, refusing to comply. He was subdued with a taser and had to be treated later for minor injuries. Not only that, but Ayers' daring but doomed escape earned him fresh charges, attempted escape, and criminal mischief, adding to his initial booking for failing to appear in court on a battery charge. And this brings us to our next inmate, who also took a page straight out of the Spider-Man's playbook. But unlike Ayers, this one had managed to pull it off and stay free, if only for a while. August 31st, 2023. Danilo Cavalcante, a convicted murderer, made headlines with a jaw-dropping prison break that looks straight out of a movie. Surveillance footage captures him casually walking into the exercise yard at Chester County Prison in Pennsylvania, glancing around, and then pulling off an acrobatic move. Using the walls for support, he climbs up between them, scaling the razor wire, and disappears onto the roof. The daring escape resulted in a 2-week manhunt, kept Chester County residents on edge. Cavalcante, originally serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of his ex-girlfriend, managed to survive by stealing food, clothes, and a rifle from local homes. At one point, a homeowner caught him in their garage and fired several shots. Cavalcante managed to escape unharmed. That close call prompted authorities to intensify their search, using thermal imaging from planes and K-9 units on the ground to track him. By September 13th, the hunt finally ended in dramatic fashion. Cavalcante was found hiding in a wooded area, attempting to crawl away, but was brought down by Yoda, a police K-9. He was apprehended without injury, marking the end of his brief but intense run. Cavalcante's escape didn't just add 15 to 30 years to his life sentence, it also cost him his right to appeal his original conviction. Days after his capture, Chester County Prison announced the installation of a metal roof over the area where he had scaled the 2 walls to make his escape. Along with this, several other security upgrades were implemented to ensure such a daring breakout could never happen again. July 11th, 2015. In one of the most infamous prison breaks in history, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the notorious drug lord and leader of the Sinaloa cartel, vanished from his max security cell in Mexico's Altiplano prison. Security footage shows him casually pacing before heading towards a shower area, the one spot not covered by cameras. Moments later, he disappears without a trace. Guards are stunned to find a small hole in that shower floor, leading to a 1.5 kilometer, nearly a mile tunnel. And it wasn't just any tunnel, it was a feat of engineering, equipped with lighting, ventilation, and a modified motorcycle on its rails. It was obvious that this tunnel was meticulously dug by his accomplices. This led to massive humiliation for Mexican authorities, especially since this wasn't even El Chapo's first escape. 2001, he would smuggle out of a different prison in a laundry cart, and for over a decade he evaded capture, building that drug empire and eluding authorities. After his rearrest in 2014, 2014, many thought his days of freedom were over, but they sorely underestimated him. A massive manhunt followed his 2015 escape, with Mexico offering a $3.8 million reward for his information. January 8, 2016. Finally, after a shootout in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, El Chapo was captured again, and this time, Mexico ensured no more escapes. He was extradited to the U.S. in 2017 and ultimately sentenced to life in ADX Florence, America's most secure prison. And so, for a man whose legend was built on escaping, El Chapo's story now ends in a place where breaking out isn't an option. June 18, 2016. In this escape that seemed more like a circus act than a jailbreak, Rostam Shakrudinov, a Russian inmate accused of robbery, stunned the world with his daring stunt. Dubbed the Snake Man by Russian media, he squeezed his way out of a prison cell in Izberbash, Dagestan, through a food hatch barely large enough for a loaf of bread. Security cams captured the jaw-dropping moment where shirtless Rostam wriggles his lean frame through the tiny opening, with his waist getting briefly stuck before he manages to push through. In the process, he loses his underwear, adding an almost comedic twist to the audacious escape. Once on the other side, he found his clothes waiting, dressed calmly, and walked out of there like a boss. The incredible escape had people comparing him to the superhuman villain from the early X-Files episode Squeeze. Others went a step further and dubbed him Houdini, and speculated about how he managed to pull off his previous robberies, and whether he had even more tricks up his sleeve. What happened next remains unclear to this day. Authorities haven't confirmed whether Shakrudinov made it beyond the prison guards or if he was recaptured shortly after his escape. Regardless, that stunt exposed vulnerabilities in the prison security and left many questioning how someone could slip through such a literal crack in the system. October 18, 2019. A quiet interview room at the Rock County Sheriff's Office in Janesville, Wisconsin, turned into a stage for a bold escape. 17-year-old Quantell D Schwarz had been left alone after his arrest on suspicion of strangulation and sexual assault. Moments later, he made his move. Surveillance cams show him springing into action as soon as the detective steps out. He opens the blinds, pushes out the window, and jumps from 12 feet up. Another camera captures him sprinting across the lawn, disappearing into the distance. By the time the detective got back just 14 minutes later, the room was empty and the open window told the whole story. Despite that, Schwarzlow's getaway didn't last long. Authorities quickly tracked him down, and his escape added to the charges already stacked against him. He was eventually given 2 years in prison and 2 years of extended supervision for the strangulation charges, with an additional 2 years for his audacious escape. And so in the end, while his brief dash for freedom was undeniably daring, the consequences guaranteed that Schwarzlow wouldn't be attempting another escape anytime soon. September 2, 2016. If you thought Schwarzlow's escape was bold, Alonzo Perez here took it to another level. The Nevada homicide suspect pulled off another daring interrogation room escape, one that, like Schwarzlow's, was all caught on camera. Handcuffed to a table, Perez didn't wait for a chance. He created one. Surveillance footage captures him twisting and contorting his body until the hinges on his handcuffs gave way. Then, with one wrist free, he climbs onto a chair, then into the ceiling, making his move to freedom. The escape doesn't stop here. Still wearing ankle chains and a broken cuff on his wrist, Perez drops into a hallway, runs through the building, and makes it outside. Then he saw a truck left idling in a nearby parking lot, so he immediately steals it and speeds off. Yet again, the freedom wouldn't last long. After a 4-day manhunt, Perez was recaptured and later given life in prison for his 3 murders. And as daring as his escape was, it wasn't the last time someone broke free by slipping out of their cuffs. The next woman quite literally wiggled her way to freedom. September 14, 2018. After being arrested for allegedly stealing a cell phone from a cleaning cart at the Baymont Inn, Amber Gonzalez, a Wisconsin woman, was taken to the station, handcuffed to a wall in a holding cell, and left alone briefly. Surveillance footage catches the whole thing. Gonzalez anxiously tugged at the cuff with her free hand, and against all odds, managed to slip out of it. The escape continues. Locked in the room, she frantically searches until she spots a set of keys hanging hanging on the door handle. With the keys in hand, she unlocks the door and bolts from the station at 4:40 p.m. Now, her plan didn't exactly scream brilliance after that. She ran through neighborhood backyards, making her way to a convenience store, where she called a man to pick her up. Together, they returned to the Baymont Inn, the same hotel where she was arrested earlier, and by 5:55 p.m., tipped off by store employees and hotel staff, police tracked her down again. This time, Gonzalez was taken straight to Waukesha County Jail. That escape earned her a felony charge, adding a potential 6-year sentence to a $10,000 fine to her troubles. Following the incident, police launched an internal review to figure out how she slipped away so easily. But nonetheless, for Gonzalez, her brief taste of freedom wasn't just short-lived. It came with a heavy price. June 7, 2022. What starts as an ordinary night at the Hillsborough County Jail quickly escalates into chaos. At around 1 a.m., Deputy Lillian Jimenez was on duty in the women's pod when she was ambushed in a premeditated attack by inmate Bridget Harvey. According to surveillance footage, Harvey approached Jimenez and claimed another inmate, April Colvin, needed help in the restroom. As Jimenez went to assist, Harvey came up from behind, wrapping a pillowcase around her neck and attempted to choke her. She would also have a comb that she sharpened as a shiv. Their plan unraveled fast. A nearby inmate noticed the attack and rushed to help, quickly joined by a group of others. Together, they managed to pull Harvey away and free Jimenez. Their actions likely prevented a much more serious outcome. Jimenez was treated for minor injuries at a hospital. Meanwhile, Harvey and Colvin were placed in solitary confinement. Harvey faced additional charges, including aggravated battery on a law enforcement officer and introducing contraband, while Colvin had been charged as a co-conspirator. Both were already in custody for unrelated crimes. According to investigators, Pear had planned the attack the day before. Colvin's role was to fake a medical emergency, distracting Jimenez, while Harvey would restrain her and steal her keys to escape. Instead, that failed plot ensured they'd spend even more time behind bars. But this wasn't the first or the last time a reckless and violent escape attempt backfired, leaving behind serious consequences for everyone involved. July 15, 2017, inside the Rio Arriba County Jail in Tierra Amarilla, New Mexico, surveillance cameras captured a chilling and ultimately failed escape attempt. Damen Herrera, accused of a brutal 5-person murder spree, used his time outside of his cell not for a break, but to execute a calculated act of violence. At the time, he was awaiting trial for the alleged murders of his stepfather, brother, and mother, as well as 2 strangers. On surveillance footage, he's seen setting his plan in motion. Complaining about the faulty sink, he lured a guard into his cell under the pretense of needing help. The moment the guard stepped inside, Herrera slammed the door shut and trapped him. Wasting no time, he grabs a flashlight hidden under a nearby desk and waits for his next target. When another guard comes down the hallway, Herrera strikes him with a heavy flashlight and tries to escape. A violent struggle follows, with the guard desperately defending himself using a plastic chair. The chaos escalated as an EMT tried to intervene, only for Herrera to swing at him too. It wasn't until the third guard joined the fray that Herrera was finally subdued and restrained in a chair, putting an end to this short-lived escape attempt. His violent outburst only added to the fear surrounding him, showing just how dangerous Herrera was, even behind bars. Now, he was later convicted of 4 consecutive life sentences for the murders and faced additional charges for attacking the guards. November 13, 2018, surveillance cams capture the Broward County Jail in a tense moment when Nikolas Cruz, Parkland school shooter, attacked Sergeant Raymond Beltran during his recreation time. Wearing his orange uniform and shower slippers, Cruz had been calmly walking laps around some tables when the incident unfolded. Beltran, seated a few feet away, had nothing but advised Cruz to be careful not to trip in his loose-fitting slippers. Cruz's response was anything but expected. He stopped, flashed both middle fingers, and then lunged at the guard, knocking him to the ground. In the scuffle, Cruz managed to grab Beltran's taser and fire it, but fortunately he missed his mark and Beltran was able to regain control, using the taser to stagger Cruz before subduing him with assistance. The altercation lasted less than a minute, but showcased Cruz's unpredictable aggression. Once restrained, Cruz was escorted back to his cell. This would add battery and assault charges to his already grim record. At the time, Cruz was awaiting trial for February's 2018 shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, which left 17 dead and 17 wounded, marking one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. 2022, Cruz was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and now he's at an undisclosed maximum security prison, spending most of his time in solitary confinement. March 31st, 2019. What seemed like a routine overtime shift for Deputy Daniel Guzman at Washington County Jail quickly turned into a tense and chaotic confrontation. As inmates enjoyed their recreational time, Guzman noticed one of them, Hayden Davis, circling his desk. At first, Davis, in custody for a previous burglary attempt, didn't seem like a threat. Guzman greeted him, but Davis remained silent. Then, without warning, Davis lunged at Guzman. Instinctively, the deputy shoved Davis to create distance, knowing that being overpowered on the ground in a pod filled with over 50 inmates could have disastrous consequences. Davis charged again, initiating a brief but intense fight. Guzman holds his own until an unexpected ally, a fellow inmate, steps in, grabs Davis, and throws him to the ground. This gives Guzman the opportunity to regain control and subdue Davis. Fortunately, Guzman's injuries were minor, just a few scrapes and bruises. For Davis, however, the consequences were far more severe. In addition to serving time for burglary, Davis now pled guilty to assaulting a public safety officer and received a combined sentence of over 6 years in prison. The court also ordered him to seek mental health and substance abuse treatment. December 5th, 2016. Inside Chicago's Cook County Jail, surveillance cams captured a shocking moment when inmate Jimmy Smith attacks a female guard in his cell. Smith, who had been in jail for 7 years awaiting trial for attempted murder and sexual assault, was caught using a laptop to watch a talk show titled "My Back's Against the Wall." When the guard attempted to confiscate that laptop, Smith reacted aggressively, punching her in the face. The situation escalated pretty quickly, with other officers responding just as fast. Male guards intervened, and Smith surrendered without further incident. Fortunately, the injured guard's wounds weren't severe, and she was treated shortly after. But our story gets crazier. Investigators found out that the talk show he was watching on the laptop featured him as the host, complete with inappropriate images of himself recorded inside that jail. The laptop had originally been issued to Smith to assist in preparing his legal defense, but instead, he'd used it for personal gain. Smith was ultimately charged with aggravated battery against a correctional officer, adding to his already lengthy list of charges. This attack also led to tighter restrictions on inmate access to technology, ensuring such an incident wouldn't happen again. July 31st, 2016. Surveillance cams inside the Pinal County Sheriff's Adult Detention Center in Arizona captured a violent attack on a detention officer that left the facility shaken. The assault was planned, calculated, and brutal. It begins with the officer conducting a routine security check in the rec area of a cell block. Unbeknownst to him, 2 inmates, Ismail Martinez and Fabian Mendival, had coordinated their attack. As the officer entered the area, both men followed, launching into a flurry of punches, aiming at his face and body. The officer fights back, holding his ground as a second officer rushes in for help. Armed with a rubber-coated data collection wand, the assisting officer manages to fend off the attackers. After a tense and chaotic struggle, the situation is under control, but not without injuries. The first officer had a facial injury and a broken ankle, while the second one suffered injuries to his hands and wrists. Meanwhile, Martinez, who was awaiting trial for burglary, was treated for a head injury at the hospital before being returned to custody. Following the incident, both inmates were charged with aggravated assault, adding to their growing list of offenses. But this wouldn't be the last time a seemingly routine prison operation escalated into a guard fighting for their life. July 16, 2019. Sergeant Mitchell Lamb and Officer Alex Benacomo had just finished escorting a nurse out of the corridor when they re-entered the pod to deal with a heated argument between an inmate and a control officer. They had no idea what was coming next. Surveillance footage captures the moment things escalated, with Lamb sitting sternly addressing an inmate, and then without warning, the inmate throws a punch, sending him stumbling into the hallway. Within seconds, 4 other inmates join in, charging at the guards. guards. The attack was relentless, with the inmates using flashlights and radios as weapons to beat the officers as they lay on the ground. In the end, Lamb and Benacomo were left with non-life-threatening injuries and were taken to the hospital in El Paso for treatment. In the aftermath, 7 inmates were charged for their roles in the attack, with 2 facing attempted murder charges. As we've seen, clashes between prisoners and guards aren't uncommon, but sometimes that tension can also build between the inmates themselves. February 15, 2017, 19-year-old Antoine Jones, detained for the tragic killing of Takia Holmes in Chicago, was sitting in a Cook County holding room when the unexpected happened. Surveillance footage captures what began as a quiet moment, with Jones seemingly asleep while handcuffed to a chair, but it didn't stay quiet for long. Jones was awaiting his bond court appearance after being charged with first-degree murder. He had reportedly fired shots at rival gang members in a turf dispute, but one of those bullets struck Takia, who was innocently riding in a van with her mother nearby. The death sent shockwaves throughout the community, and apparently, even in the jail. Without warning, another inmate approaches Jones and begins punching him repeatedly. The attack was swift and brutal, and what makes it even more notable was that the attacker was also being held on a murder charge. But in prison, there are unspoken rules against innocent women and children. The inmate got a disciplinary ticket for the assault, while Jones, who had already faced the ire of the public, now faced additional scrutiny. Earlier this year, he was sentenced to 71 years in prison for the murder. September 15, 2018, a routine prison transport turns violent aboard a Cook County jail bus. In this group of handcuffed inmates, we have Javante Sarat, a man whose history of trouble made him anything but ordinary. And as the chaos unfolded, one thing became clear. Sarat had forgotten that even prison buses come with cameras. Javante wasn't new to trouble. Originally arrested in 2016 on a burglary charge, he was later accused of a series of armed robberies while out on bail. Back in custody, he quickly gained a reputation for violence, with at least 15 fights logged during his time behind bars. Back to the trip, Sarat managed to free himself from his restraints. Wielding the steel lock and a chain from his cuffs, he attacks another inmate, turning the confined space of the bus into a scene of chaos. And this wasn't Sarat's last outburst. Over the years, he was involved in 4 more violent incidents, 2 of them on prison buses. And so naturally, Sarat's continued erratic behavior raised serious questions about the risks of transporting such volatile individuals without additional safeguards, and whether authorities were taking lessons from these repeated failures. But one thing is for sure, in prison, even in the cramped confines of a transport bus, cameras are always watching, and sometimes so are we. June 2017, quiet game of cards. The Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville turned into a nightmare. Surveillance cameras capture the horrifying moment when an inmate, Craig Ranki, slips out of his handcuffs, pulls out a homemade blade, and attacks 4 fellow prisoners who were shackled to the table, unable to defend themselves. This was over in minutes, raising serious questions about the safety and accountability inside that prison. According to a federal lawsuit filed by 2 of the injured men, Shamiki Pugh and Maurice Lee, prison officers watched the attack from behind a locked door and even laughed as it unfolded. The lawsuit alleges that the officers failed to follow protocol, neglecting to strip search Ranki before placing him near other inmates. They stabbed Pugh at least 10 times, but he was ultimately saved by another inmate who broke free and tackled the assailant. Disturbingly, that inmate was pepper sprayed by the guards while Ranki wasn't. The officers also delayed providing first aid for over 10 minutes, leaving the victims bleeding on the floor. Ranki, already serving a life sentence for murder, was later sentenced to an additional 86 years for the attack. Meanwhile, Pugh and Lee continue to seek justice, accusing the prison of deliberate indifference and violations of their constitutional rights. And at the end of the day, it seems that both the inmates and the guards forget that there were cameras in prison.